Again, thank you for all who have come at this time on this beautiful day. And thank you for all those prayers that we give for ourselves as we go through with the other parishes of Evanston, but also for all those in the Archdiocese, and for praying again for those who are struggling in both Haiti and in Afghanistan. So we continue to keep them in our prayers. So at this time, I'd like to invite up Brian Romer Niemiec, who works at the Vicariate II office with Bishop Bartosik. He's relatively new to Chicago. He can give you a little bit more specifics, but he's from Boston originally. So please give him a warm welcome from St. Mary's.
I failed the second test. I broke the microphone. Oh, okay. Whew. All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming here tonight. I want to. We're going to 8:30. Is that right? 8:30, 7:45, 7:30. How long do we have tonight? Okay. I hate going late, so I just want to make sure I know what I'm working with here. We'll shoot between 8 and 8:30 then. I know Father Kevin already said it, but there are 56 slides on this piece of paper. And since we're only going to 8 or 8:30 and not to 11, I'm probably not going to go through each one, but you'll have them with you to take from here. And of course, as questions come up, feel free to ask me, email Father Kevin, whatever it takes. I'm going to break tonight up into 3 sections. 2 are going to be fairly short, and then 1 will be longer. And I'll stop after each section for questions, but if you have some in the middle of my ramblings, just throw up your hand or just say, hey, stop. The first section is on the purpose of a parish. Like, why are we here? Why is St. Mary here? The second is the need for renewal. Why has Cardinal Supich called for Renew My Church? And the third is what happens, particularly what happens in the first phase of Renew My Church that you are about to enter into, this decisions and discernment, structural discernment phase of Renew My Church, but then also talking about the 2 that follow that and sort of the overarching end goal and vision of Renew My Church. So does that make sense? So those 3 things what we'll talk about tonight. So to begin with the purpose of a parish, on the 2nd and 3rd page of your hymnals, there's the Great Commission. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, teaching them to baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, Holy Spirit. But I'm really interested in, on the following page, this picture of Vatican II, where all the bishops gathered in the 60s, and underneath it there's a great quote from one of the documents of Vatican II, and it says, "In every age, the Church carries the responsibility of reading the signs of the times and interpreting them in the light of the gospel, if it is to carry out its task. In language intelligible to every generation, it should be able to answer the ever-recurring questions which people ask about the meaning of this present life and the life to come, and how one is related to the other. We must therefore recognize and understand the world in which we live, its explanations, its longings, and its often dramatic characteristics." And I love this quote when we talk about the purpose of a parish, because I think when we think of a parish, we think of the Eucharist, we think of Mass, we think of the Knights of Columbus, we think of a coffee hour, we think of a lot of tangible things, but this points us to just beyond these 4 walls, right? So when we think about the purpose of a parish, we normally say that the community of a parish, the parish community, invites, accompanies, forms, and sends disciples. So disciples, followers of Jesus Christ, people who journey with Jesus in their lives, looking for fullness of life, looking for more than jobs and friends and movies and Notre Dame and Boston College can fulfill. And that journey hits all four of those characteristics before it. So to invite, when we get to evangelization, that's a big one. How are we just not the 50 or so people gathered here? How are we engaging the world around us? And when we find someone who is struggling, when we find someone who has questions, when we find a family member who hasn't been to church in a while but is clearly really miserable because something really tragic happened to them, how are we inviting them back into this encounter with Jesus, back into this community of faith that we belong into? Accompany. So Father Kevin said I'm from Boston. You have never been to a more silent church than a Sunday morning mass in crusty New England. Everybody comes in, one by one, sits down, makes sure there's enough space between them and the next person so they don't have to actually interact with anybody. It's very reverent, it's very quiet. But to accompany means to come alongside someone, to actually journey and walk with people in this great mystery of life, this great mystery of faith. And as we think about how we do that at church, at Mass, how we do that outside of Sundays, how we do that in our neighborhoods and in our families and with our friends and in our schools, to just be able to walk with someone, not to teach them or to say, oh, I know this way better than you, I'm just as lost as everybody else, but just to be with them in the journey. So we're meant to accompany each other in faith. Form, probably something we're more familiar with. It is teaching, yes, religious ed, adult formation, yes, but also to form, to mentor, to continue that relationship with people as they grow deeper in Christ. And then to send, this missionary aspect of we're not meant to stay here in the church and in this campus, but we're meant to go out, we're meant to realize God's kingdom in the world, or realize we're called to make the world a little bit better, and clearly the world could use it at this point. So does that make sense? Purpose of a parish. Invite, accompany, form, send. Disciples. Cool. There won't be a quiz, don't worry. Okay. So that's that. The need for renewal. So, I don't know even what page this is. This is slide 17. The funny-looking cross, the San Damiano cross. This is the cross in the chapel of San Damiano where Francis of Assisi heard the microphone call from God saying, Francis, rebuild my church, which you can see is falling apart. And he looked around and he saw the walls sort of cracked and the stone tumbling, and he, oh, okay, I can do this. And so he went to the quarry, got the stones, fixed it up, made it nice and pretty. And then he realized that wasn't the church that God meant, that it was his local community in Assisi, but also in Greater Italy, and then he ended up founding the Franciscans. And this renewal this rebuilding was a spiritual rebuilding, the return to a life of Christ that was founded on service, on giving your gifts away for the life of the world. And I like St. Francis a lot just because it gives me and us permission to say that the church has never gotten it right? We always screw things up. So in 313, when Constantine converted to Catholicism on his deathbed and Christianity became the religion of Rome, ever since then we started to institutionalize, and then Benedict would come along and actually we need to pray a little more. We need some silent prayer, and then we'd keep going along, and the church fathers would bring us back to to something that we had forgotten. And then you had Francis and Dominic, and then the Council of Trent, and then Vatican II, and all of these moments in time are reminders to us that we never, as a church, get things totally right. And so in the here and now, again, Jesus continues to call us to rebuild his church, to renew his church, which is clearly, from all the data points that data people amass, is falling apart. 27% decline in mass attendance in 20 years. About 2/3 of the number of Catholic school students than there were 15 years ago. A student that begins religious ed today where their family does not practice faith at home. So they go to class, but and maybe they go to mass on Sunday with their class, but not really part of the life of the family. A student that starts today in religious ed that doesn't have faith at home has a 1% chance of practicing faith after they graduate from religious education. A 1% chance. That's crazy to me. Anyway, I don't mean to preach. That's his job. So anyway, renewal. We're called to this. We're called again to renew this church. And I think one of the great images. Sorry, I'm going to make you go back now. Page 11. This Christendom to New Apostolic or New Missionary Age. The little sun in the picture. So when it says Christendom, I was talking to my father over the summer, and I was trying to explain to him what I do, and he's a fallen away Catholic who's now agnostic, maybe atheist. Really likes Joseph Campbell though. So I mean, what can you do? And he was asking me what I'm doing and why are we going through this? And I said, well, Dad, you grew up in the 50s and 60s, in a very Polish town in New Jersey. You went to Catholic school because all of your friends went to Catholic school, and all of your parents' friends went to Catholic school. You were in the Catholic Sports League, or the CYO, or whatever, I forget what it's called, because all of your friends and the whole community was in the Catholic Sports League. Your dad was in the Knights of Columbus, so he would go with all the other dads on Thursday night and do a little ministry, do a little mission work, and then drink beer at the Knights of Columbus tap. Your mother, my grandmother, was in the Guild of St. Francis, and they would put on fairs and raffles and auctions and stuff to raise money for the parish. And Catholicism was just that was life, right? That was the way things were. There was no other way of being Polish and Catholic in New Jersey in 1955. But now, and in some ways it's even better, now you need to say yes to it. Now you can play basketball on Thursday nights and it not be in a Catholic setting. Now you can be in all types of friend groups and internet groups and social media groups and in-person groups if there's no COVID, and could have nothing to do with being, it just has to do with being human. And so the Catholic piece, the Christ piece, is something that each of us every day has to say yes to. And our church was not designed for that for centuries. It was just a given. People came in the door, we administered sacraments, they went about their business. But now there's an intentionality behind it that we're not prepared for, that we've never been prepared for. Does that make sense, or am I just off on a tangent somewhere? You can say you're crazy, that's fine. No? Okay, there's head nodding, that's good. I haven't lost you yet. And so the three imperatives of Renew My Church, making disciples, building community, inspiring witness, speak to that need for renewal. So make disciples, the purpose of a parish, to invite, accompany, form, and send missionary disciples. Build community. We do that, we have that pathway of discipleship in the context of a parish community. You can't get it, you can't get it necessarily on the side of the street. You can sort of get it in your family, but sometimes you need more voices. You need a family of families that will walk with you in this. So build community and inspire witness. That again, the point of faith, the point of our relationship and discipleship with Christ is actually to go out into the world for the life of the world. So those are the three imperatives of Renew My Church and of renewal in the Archdiocese. All right, so those were the first 2 points. Any questions, concerns, disagreements? He went, yeah, that makes sense. I just went along with it. And then when it was my choice, I said, I don't need it. And so, yeah. He was fascinated by it, and he never thought about it that way. And he's still, he's living his life. He's helping my stepmom out. She's almost done with her last treatment of chemo for colon cancer. So we're on the downslope. So she's doing really well. But yes. Oh yes, sorry. She asked, "What did my dad say?" And so I went on a tangent. Yes, I will repeat the questions from here on out. Anyway. Cool. All right. So the third and longest piece, and probably why what sort of most piqued your attention, is how does this Renew My Church process work? All right. So it's in 3 phases, and number 19 on your lovely PowerPoint presentation sort of illustrates those 3 phases. Discernment and decisions, operations, transition, and building the new reality, or building our new reality as it lives on here. So, every parish in the Archdiocese is going through this Renew My Church process, all 340 of them when this whole thing started. Each parish was put into a group of parishes. St. Mary is in a grouping, I'm sure most of you know, with St. Nick's, St. Athanasius, St. Joan of Arc, the Shield Center, and that's it. Yeah, 5 of you. This September, a group of people will meet, representatives from each parish, and each pastor and leadership team has been asked to identify 5 members of the community, be it staff or volunteers or whoever, leaders in the parish, to represent each parish in this grouping meeting. There are a series of 7 meetings that will happen over the course of September, October, of this group of groups that's been raised up. There'll also be time in the coming months where that group will come back to the parish and present to the parish and request feedback from the parish on different things. As the grouping conversations progress, they'll be asked to do 3 things. The first is they'll be asked to learn a little bit about each parish/Shield Center in the grouping. So they have a sense of strengths and weaknesses, charisms, different gifts that communities may have, so that when we get to the next part, the scenarios, they'll have a better understanding of what we're all dealing with. Then the group will be presented with a list of initial scenarios. So Renew My Church, when looking at parish sustainability, uses 3 criteria, 2 of them quantitative and 1 of them qualitative, to say, okay, if I'm looking at this parish, is it viable to really undertake this type of renewal that we're asking parishes to undertake? The first is there a Sunday or weekend mass attendance count of 800 parishioners or more? The idea being, 1, is there a critical mass of people in the parish that can engage in renewal and grow? The other part being, we have a finite number of pastors how we make sure that there are enough pastors for the parishes that are going to be here after Renew My Church is finished. The second quantitative number is 750,000. That is the annual offertory, major gifts, Christmas collections, Easter collections, everything but rental income. $750,000 of non-rental income of offertory that comes in annually. Asking the question, are there enough resources to engage in this renewal project that we are asking each parish to embark on? Now, I will tell you that we are 3/4 of the way through Renew My Church now. 40% of the end parishes, so they go through this process, the cardinal makes a decision, parishes merge or stay by themselves or close or whatever. 40% of the parishes that exit this phase of Renew My Church miss one of these two criteria. They're either below 800 people on a weekend or they're below 750,000 for a variety of reasons. A parish is in a economically struggling area. There's no way we're going to hit $750,000. A parish is the only Catholic parish in 2 or 3 square miles. We need a Catholic presence in this area of the archdiocese, even though they don't make 800 people on a weekend. The parish stays. So there are exceptions to those, but those are the two quantitative benchmarks. Make sense? Okay. The qualitative benchmark, which you will know only by, which the grouping team will respond to only because they've been able to engage the other parishes in conversation about strengths and weaknesses and where we're going and where we've been and all that kind of stuff, is the ability of each parish, each combined parish, each new parish, to live up to those 3 imperatives: to make disciples, to inspire witness, to build community. How successful will X parish be in doing those 3 things? So, Mass count, offertory, RMC, Renew My Church imperatives are the 3 criteria for this process. And so, the pastors and a couple of others, the bishop and a couple of others in the arch will sit down and name some initial scenarios for what some healthy structures of the grouping will look like. So, St. Nick's and Joan of Arc merge to become one parish, but both sites stay open. St. Athanasius and the Shield Center merge, and both sites stay open, but St. Athanasius is the parish. St. Mary's, they stay by themselves. And those are the 3 parishes that remain. All right, scenario 2. St. Nick's stays by itself. St. Athanasius and St. Joan of Arc merge. St. Mary stays by itself. Scenario 3, the Shield Center stays open, all the other parishes close, and everybody who's Catholic goes to Northwestern. Highly doubtful. But you know what I mean. So there are a wide range of scenarios gets presented. So the scenarios are presented to the team. The grouping, the team of teams, the grouping feedback teams from all the parishes in the Shield Center, their job at that point is to say, what are the strengths of each scenario as far as those criteria go, those 3 mass attendance, Renew My Church imperatives, and offertory? What are the weaknesses? And what are the scenarios that initial meeting with the pastors and the archdiocesan team, what scenarios did they miss and we should consider? So at one point in the process, at one point this fall, the grouping team will come back to the parish and say, hey, here are the initial scenarios. What did they miss? Can we think of any other scenarios that would be helpful in reaching those 3 criteria for this Evanston grouping? That make sense? Yeah, okay. So we go along, we provide feedback on the scenarios that were presented, we provide feedback on the new scenarios that the team and the parishes add on to that. And then at the end, a representative from each parish will sit down and write the final feedback report. And they will say something like, we, the Evanston grouping, have, discerned these different scenarios. We think, we list, these are the strengths and weaknesses of each of the scenarios. We think scenario 2 and scenario 7 have the best chance of realizing those three criteria for Renew My Church, that best meet those 3 criteria. And here is why. But they'll give feedback for all of it. And they'll present those findings to the executive committee of the Renew My Church board, which basically means they'll present to our bishop of our Vicariate, Bishop Bartosik, the head of the Renew My Church team, the Cardinal's liaison to Renew My Church, Father Jason Malave, a couple of other very fancy people that are way above my head. And they'll present to that team, and they'll say, and here are, this is what we found, these are the scenarios that we think make the most sense. The executive committee will then make a recommendation to the full Renew My Church committee, which is made up of non-paid lay people from the parishes. Their job is to make sure that the recommendation that's been given to them matches with all the rest of the decisions that have been made throughout the archdiocese. So for example, there was a recommended scenario in our Vicariate that called for 2 parishes merging to become one, with both sites staying open. But one of the sites was really small, and in the recommendation it said, we'll reassess this site every 2 years. And the Renew My Church committee got this and said, we haven't really used that language at all yet. Why would we? What would be the hope of keeping this open every year if you're just gonna say, oh well, in 2 years maybe then it'll be like, are we kicking this down the bucket? Like this isn't aligned with the other decisions that the cardinal has made, and so that recommendation was altered because it was not how we were just making decisions in the rest of the archdiocese. So that makes sense. So that their job is to make sure that there is uniformity and equity among the rest of the archdiocese. So then they do their job, and then that recommendation is taken to the cardinal, and the cardinal makes the final decision. The cardinal, the vast majority of the time, has accepted the recommendation that was made at the beginning by that presentation and the executive committee's conversation with the parishes. Sometimes not. Sometimes it's a different scenario. Sometimes he pulls one out of the blue. But the majority of the time, it is a pretty linear process from there. Questions? Let me stop right there. Questions, concerns? Okay, this is... Okay, yes? Yes, so is anybody preserving learnings along the way? So yes, so what we're doing right now is a learning. Parishes used to go into this cold. It has gotten significantly better since we did this for the first time 4.5 years ago. Is it perfect? No. Are people going to get angry? Absolutely. Guaranteed. The only thing I can guarantee about the Renew My Church process is somebody will get angry. But it is, believe it or not, much better than the first time through. One more time. Why are we going through this when the archdiocese? Oh, what? So the question was, why are we going through this when the archdiocese has already made up its mind what they're doing with these churches in Evanston? Who's closing? Who's staying open? Who's merging? Etc. Yes. Yes. That was a question. I often think when I when I come to parishes and I have to do this talk, I feel like every person should have like a little like movie soundtrack behind them, and I think mine at this moment is the Imperial March from Star Wars when I come in to talk to these parishes. I know the level of trust between the parishes and the archdiocese is not very strong. I can say with certainty that no parish in Evanston has its future decided already. The Shield Center. Yeah. So so St. Nick's had to be assigned an administrator because Father Tito retired. Yes. Father Brad went to the Shield Center because Father Kevin retired. So in order to go through this process, you need a pastor or an administrator, or he's called a chaplain, Father Brad. But just because we have assigned a new priest doesn't mean that one is staying open or not. It is not. It is not a parish. It is a campus ministry with a chaplain. That's a good question. I do not know. I am spitballing. If I were to guess, I would say that one of the questions that will arise is there a better way to support the Catholic community at Northwestern than having a dedicated chaplain and staff, and is there a way that there could be shared resources between one of the parishes and the Shield Center? I'm guessing that's why they're in the group, but I do not know the answer to that question. Sorry? Not necessarily. I mean, oh, sorry, you're right, I failed in my task. So the question is about the Shield Center. Why is the Shield Center here in this grouping? And I said, at the end of the day, I don't know. I can only speculate because the big question for the Archdiocese is staffing resources, particularly priest staffing resources. And priest staffing resources in a sense of the ability, the number of priests able to be pastors, to be strong leaders of communities. Like, can we find, so at the beginning of Renew My Church, there were 340 or so parishes in the Archdiocese. Could we have found 340 men to be pastors of parishes? Yes, I think there's still 1,100 or so priests and religious priests in the diocesan and religious priests in the Archdiocese. But do we have 340 strong leaders that can move parishes out of decline? That's the question. And will we have that number in 5 years, in 10 years? That's the question. So is Shield a drain on resources? I don't think any more or less than any other parish would be, was the follow-up question, is Shield a drain on resources? Yes, it is a community of faith, but because it has a dedicated chaplain, do we also have to take a look at what are the best use of our resources in Evanston, which includes the Shield Center? Yes, I think we do. Father Kevin.
But over the years, it has been granted certain things. Cardinal George granted them the ability to host weddings there. So the records for the weddings are actually held there. Is it a drain on resources? Not on the parishes, because none of us give any money to Shield. They actually have had to do their own. So people who come to them beyond, of course, most students can't afford that. There are what they call associates, people who are part of that ministry too. They have a religious ed program. We do a lot of things together. I go over there every Thursday and say Mass over there. All the other parishes help out when they can. They invite us into many things because, again, many of the students from Northwestern come here also during their 4 to 6 years. So they don't take money from us. None of the parishes give them money. they have to support themselves, and I think they do a fine job. So that's why they're able to be part of this, and we would want them to be part of that too, because they bring a lot of things to the area also.
So I may not have answered that question, but did I at least respond to it? Okay. Who else? How are schools and religious education factored into the decision? So it depends on the health and strength of the schools and the number of schools in a grouping. Either the schools will be part of the Renew My Church decision, or the Office of Catholic Schools will take that question offline and revisit it after the parish structural transformation has happened. And in this case, the Archdiocese has said, the Office of Catholic Schools said, we're going to take it out and we'll look at Pope John, the 23rd Academy, and St. Athanasius outside of this. St. Joan of Arc is independent of the Archdiocese, so they do their thing. But it's not part of this upcoming conversation in the fall. And as long as the two schools are sustainable and have healthy numbers, and there's.
Because it's two parishes combined.
Right. So what will happen with religious ed? Yes, depending on how the parish structure happens. If two sites stay open, like they'll have to figure out as a new parish, where is religious ed offered? Is it offered at both places? There's no cookie cutter model for that. It's whatever makes most sense for the new community.
Initiatives and the invitation for all to gather.
Yeah, thank you. On inclusivity as far as racial diversity, at sort of the grouping level, the pastors know their parishes. That we don't assign who's on the grouping team, so the pastors will call those people forward from their communities. In the decision-making process in the scenarios, racial demographics are a huge part of that, making sure that particularly minority communities can be ministered to in the language and the culture that they are most comfortable in. And so we see that a lot. We saw that a lot in our vicariate most recently in the last wave, where we had the sort of Our Lady of Mercy grouping going up to St. Ignatius, St. Jerome, Holy Child Jesus, which used to be Margaret Mary's, St. Henry, St. Timothy. How do we take all of those languages and communities and cultures and find a structure that can at least attempt to support the many different needs in that corridor of the northern side of Chicago? Did we succeed? I don't know, but there was a huge consideration. As far as leadership, and I'm really glad you brought this up because this is incredibly important. As we look for part of renewal, part of how do we stop this trend line that keeps going like this year after year. Leadership is incredibly important in that role, in turning that around. One, because if the pastor and a couple of key staff do everything, there's a bottleneck, right? We talk about accompaniment, walking with each other. Well, Father Kevin can't walk with all 750, 800, 900 people in the parish community. There needs to be leaders that are raised up, informed, and sent to and hold real authority in the parish to go and do and walk with people in this life of Christ. And just as we need to do a better job of calling that leadership up from the parish community, just like there is a decline in number of priests and number of priest leaders, there is also an equal decline in the number of professional lay people that are going into church ministry. There are a lot less of me than there are of my predecessor who just retired. And so it may not be as stark because I'm not up there preaching on Sunday, but the same lack of leadership also exists in the lay staff world as well. So yes, this question of leadership, if we don't get this right, then yeah, we can just sit on our hands now. Absolutely. Thank you for raising that.
Thank you.
What happens when a church closes?
Yeah. So what happens when a church closes, and then what happens to the property, et cetera, et cetera? So closing happens in two separate steps. The first step is there's a final mass, and then ministry at the site stops. And then because the closing of a parish requires the okay from Rome, the request is sent to Rome that this parish that we're closing, Saint Edward's, which is not closing, but Saint Edward's is closing. We would like to relegate the site to a profane but not sordid use. Basically, it's not going to be a worship space for the Catholic Church anymore, but it also can't be, think of something that's sordid. I don't know. Exactly, a brothel. Thank you. And so the masses and ministry stop, the parish is relegated, the site is relegated, and then the real estate can be sold to developers, to whoever. The profit or the proceeds of the sale go to the new parish. So if, for example, St. Athanasius Parish closed and became part of St. Mary, and we sold the St. Athanasius site, the money from the sale would come to the new parish at the St. Mary site. The only exception to that is if there is operational but not capital debt. So like, so there is some debt. There is some debt that the archdiocese has. There's some loans that the archdiocese has financed to parishes, and they are able to take no more than I think a third or some less than 50% of the proceeds to pay off some of that remaining debt before the rest goes to the parish. So, but anyway, the vast majority would go to the parish. Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question would be, if church building A would bring twice the amount of money E would bring on the real estate market, would that factor into the decision? Say, let's close church building A because we're going to do twice as good monetarily than closing church building B.
Actually, is the cost of real estate a factor in which church you close? I'm not sure if we're that smart, but the most important location piece is based on location of parishes related to the other. So, for example, probably saw this one in the news. St. Cornelius, St. Tarcissus, and St. Tekla were all in a grouping, all up Milwaukee Avenue on the northwest side. St. Tarcissus was in the middle. St. Cornelius closed on the downside, St. Thecla closed on the north side. For the point being that if we had chosen St. Cornelius, there would have been nothing northwest of us until you got to St. Juliana, which was, I think, 3 miles away. And if we had chose St. Thecla, there was nothing southeast until you got to, I think, Immaculate Heart of Mary or something, which we then ended up closing in this last wave of Renew My Church. So more of location to prevent Catholic deserts than real estate. Real estate isn't part of real estate doesn't come into the feedback team, executive committee session piece, if that makes sense. Do parishes get renamed after the combined? Almost always, yes. The only exception is if there is a small parish that merges with a bigger parish, then we normally use the language of this parish is joined to big parish Saint X, and big parish Saint X because it had 4,000 people before the thing continues after it has taken the 500 or so. But if you're talking about similar or almost similar sizes, yes. Certainly in Evanston, most of the parishes are at least in the ballpark of the same size. So I would most likely be renamed, yeah. Yes, yes. Yeah.
Three churches now, and they get a whole new name.
Yes.
It always be St. Mary's Church.
Yeah.
St. Mary's Church as part of the parish.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, good point. Thanks for that, Kevin. So up in Winnetka, Sacred Heart Church and St. Philip Church are churches of Divine Mercy Parish. Yeah. In case we weren't confusing enough. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. During, like, in the next few months, if there was a huge influx of people. Oh, I don't know if that's ever happened. I would think so. I can't think of an example of where it has, though. But yeah, well, actually, the closest is actually St. Edward in Vicariate 2, where. Oh, my sorry. Thank you for yelling at me. Or I could remember to repeat the question like you've asked me to. So the question was, so we're going through this process for the next 3 or 4 months. If there was a huge influx of parishioners in this fall, would that change sort of the decision making of all this and the discernment of all this? And I would say the closest that comes to that is St. Edward's. We were using data from a transition year. One of the retiring pastor was leaving, the new pastor wasn't named yet, and those mass attendance numbers were low. We were doing this in the fall, and the October mass count came out for the fall, and they were substantially higher than in that transition year. And so we used the new data as part of that conversation because it was more accurate with the new pastor, with where they were in 2019 as opposed to 2018 or whatever the years were at that point. So we do factor that in. I don't know in COVID how that would work, but yeah.
Wait, stand up. Hold on.
Yep. Yeah. I failed too many times. Now they're going to make you speak into them.
I forgot my question. Now, what was I going to say? Oh, the process has started for this, right? How long until we all face the fact that, hey, it's coming down?
Perfect. Everybody hear that? How long does this take? Okay. So let's finish then. Let's finish this third point, and then we can get back to questions, because that's so. The meetings happen throughout the fall. The recommendation will go to the executive committee and to the RMC board in late November, early December. The cardinal will make a final decision. I believe we're in January, right, Father Kevin, in this grouping? Yeah, so the final decision will come in week 2 or 3 of January. When the decision is made, the new parishes will be effective July 1st of 2022. So if St. Nick's closes and merges with St. Joan of Arc, and there's one parish just at the St. Joan of Arc site, the last Mass at St. Nick's would probably take place sometime in that May or June timeframe of 2022, with the new parish with its new name starting in July 1st of 2022. From when the decision is made to about 8 to 12 months after, there's that, going all the way back to that last slide I had you look at, the 3 phases of Renew My Church: discernment and decisions, operations transition, building new reality. The operations transition is the team that comes in to help the merging parishes transition both structurally, new bank accounts, staffing questions, HR issues, all that jazz, and spiritually. How do we merge religious education ministries? How do we deal with the different chapters of the Knights of Columbus? What do we need to prioritize given the strengths of these communities that are coming together? So that takes about 8 to 12 months, and then once the structure has transitioned, then the question of building the new reality of how do we make sure that in 15 years I'm not back here at this church going through this same spiel because the numbers continue to decrease. How do we, in 21st century Chicago, build communities that invite people into a relationship and a journey with Christ, and send people out to make the world a little bit better? And what does that look like uniquely in Evanston versus in the city, versus in South Chicago, versus the rest of the Archdiocese? So 3 phases of my church. So thank you for bringing us back to that one. Yes.
Sorry. You said that there were some scenarios where 2 churches merged, but both sites stayed open. Mm-hmm. And why would that happen? Why would they both stay open?
Why would they both stay open? Some of it could be location, that the locations are rather spread out, so we need coverage. So Divine Mercy up in Winnetka, there's a church in, Divine Mercy, which is based in Winnetka, has a church, Sacred Heart, in Winnetka, and has a church, St. Philip, in Northfield, on the other side of 94. So both communities have a Catholic church where they can worship, but there is one administrative staff that ministers to both locations. So there are some cost saving. So there's only one director of operations. There's only one director of religious ed. So it keeps the overhead down at each location, but allows us to continue a ministry in both towns. In other cases, there are, to get back to the point of ethnic realities, there are a couple of parishes down into the city that have 2 sites because one site is predominantly English and one site is predominantly Spanish speaking. And so how do we, we're not going to, do we close the English site and and they're not going to go to the Spanish Mass, so they just sort of go off into that. So both sites remained open so that both ministries in both languages could continue. So there are different factors that we would take into consideration.
Hi. What happens to our capital improvement money? We're like on a 5-year plan. We're about halfway through.
I'm sorry, I'm going deaf, and I'm only 34. Can you say it one more time?
So we're doing this capital improvements where we're we redid the parking lot and the school and all this, the campaign. Yeah, thanks. We're about halfway through. What happens to the rest of our 2.5 years, the money we've pledged for that.
What happens to the money that you've pledged? That answer I don't know. I don't know how the capital campaign was designed, and so that I can't answer. Father Kevin, do you have any comment on that?
I'm going to spend your money as soon as I get it. So we are improving the parish. So even if we join with another parish, the church staying open, the money will continue this process, keeping it open, all the things that we talked about. So that can continue going on, especially if it's two churches come together in one parish. That will just keep on. If something was to happen where there's a choice where this church is closing, then we stop the campaign. So we've been using the money as a promise. So all projects you set to support are all structural things that keep us safe.
Oh, sorry. Hold on. You have to, again, I failed in my job.
In one of the slides, I don't know if you spoke to it, but I think you kind of touched on it, was children who are raised Catholic today. I think if I do the math right, it's about 1 in 10 end up being practicing Catholics as adults. How does that compare to other religions?
I mentioned children who go into religious ed without faith lives at home, but overall, about 10% of children baptized today end up being practicing Catholics when they are adults. And how does that compare to other religions? In other mainstream religions, that's actually not bad, 10%. That's about average, maybe a little above average, not including evangelicals. So as far as bad performances go, I guess we are not the worst, yeah. But I think all of the main Christian religions have the same issue. We're just working from a much bigger base.
Just something anecdotal. At a wedding that I was at, a reception at the Evanston Women's, one side of the family was Catholic, the other one was from Willow Creek. And I was sitting with a table of all the pastors and their families from Willow Creek, and they were having the same situation. They raised their family, just like I hear from, we've raised our children Catholic, we've brought them up in all the sacraments, and they've walked away from the church. They were telling the same story. So in many ways, it's an American thing in many ways across many faith traditions.
So it's 8:15. We want to do a couple more questions, and then maybe we'll close in prayer and we'll get some food. And then if you have, I'm happy. I'll sit here as late or as long as it takes to talk with you. So I'm not running anywhere. But maybe a couple more questions in the back. Oh, who's first?
Hi, thank you for this opportunity. A couple of questions from my side. The Archdiocese is showing good interest in renewing my church, and I would infer it to be, maybe unfortunately some churches has to be closed. That's the reality right now. What is the Archdiocese doing to keep a church open rather than closing it?
You mean before or after this process?
Before this process.
So what is the Archdiocese doing before this process to keep the churches open? So when I arrived in Chicago about 2.5 years ago, I was greeted, I don't know how many of you will be familiar with this, but there's the phrase downtown, which refers to the archdiocesan pastoral people. Oh, you're from downtown. You're going to tell me what to do. Yes, thank you. There has been a series of downtown initiatives over the last couple decades, hasn't there? Parish transformation, Christ Renews His Parish, things I don't even know because I haven't been here that long. program after program after program, alpha after program after program. And I think where we got lost is not that these weren't good programs. So to answer your question, we have been trying for decades now of what's the right program, what's the right lens, what's the right way to tackle this issue. And most haven't really moved the needle that much. The line continues, the trend continues. The only reason I'm here, the only reason I moved from, well, not the only reason, I moved from Boston to Chicago because this is where my wife's family is, and now we have aunts and uncles that love to watch our 2 kids and cause chaos everywhere. But one of the reasons I said yes to this job was because finally the people who are above me weren't talking about, here's the next program. They were talking about, we have a culture, we have a way of being church in America. And we've had this way of being church for a long time. It's not working. To the point about leadership, right? The priest does everything. And when there weren't enough priests, the priests and the lay staff that got paid to do it were doing everything. Well, that doesn't seem to be working because there just seem to be fewer and fewer consumers that want what the priest and the lay staff are offering. All we need to do is teach people more. If we just teach them more stuff about the Catholic faith, they'll come to love it. Well, now we have Bishop Barron's Word on Fire, we have Busted Halo, we have Formed, we have more resources, more content in the church. I could sit on my computer for the rest of my life and I wouldn't get through all the videos and content that we now have to teach about the faith. But yet that doesn't move the needle either. What's happened before Renew My Church? We've unfortunately lost that one, right? We're 3/4 of the way through. No program is going to realign a church's trajectory in a way that would change how this is going to shake out. Because the only way a parish is going to be renewed is if it says, all right, we need to change from a culture of bulletin announcements and email blasts that are read by the same 50 people to a culture of invitation, where everybody in this pew today is willing and has the courage to go out to someone they know or someone they don't know and say, hey, I'm sorry you had a rough day. There is more than life than this. Come check this out. The only way we're going to renew our parishes is if we move from a culture of individualism and sort of isolation of, back to curmudgeon-y Boston, like this is my pew, please do not come here with your screaming child, like this is my place to pray, to a culture of belonging. That everybody who walks through those doors feels like they belong and feels like this can be a community that supports them. How do we move from a culture of teaching content to a culture of accompaniment, of walking with people as they wrestle with this very challenging faith that somehow we still struggle with and wrestle with every day of our lives? How do we go from a one more, and then off to you. How do we go from a culture of consumerism to a culture of leadership? That by our baptismal call, each one of us is not only is called to leadership, but that the church and its leaders, the pastor, the lay staff, whatever, has the ability to raise you up and to empower you with real authority and leadership, to go and make mistakes and, okay, it didn't work out, let's try this again. But how do we create a culture of leadership in our communities that stops the bottleneck at the top? Like, that's why I'm really excited about Building New Reality, because none of that is a program. It's about a different way of being a community. Sorry, again, on my soapbox, I really apologize. Question and then question. Oh.
So that downtown archdiocese, what are they doing to cut costs and reduce and sell property and become poor again? Because I have a friend who just took a job there, and his comment was, I was surprised how much I'm getting paid, and he came from industry media. And so there is a little bit of a perception that maybe folks are not exactly sharing in the costs or the pain.
Yep. So how is downtown cutting costs? So when Renew My Church started, So believe it or not, there are two downtowns. There is the administrative downtown at the Quigley Center, right by the cathedral on Rush Street. That used to be the old seminary, big Gothic building. That's where all the administrative offices are, Catholic schools, the Cardinal's office. And then down on 33rd Street, is the Cardinal Meyer Center, where all the pastoral offices are. Lifelong formation, human dignity and solidarity, youth ministry, evangelization. When Renew My Church started, there were 120 employees at the Cardinal Meyer Center. Today, there are less than 60. When Renew My Church started, the Office of Catholic Schools went from, all right, I'm not going to get that number right, so we're going to forget that one. But anyway, there are costs associated with Renew My Church, so there are staff that are hired to go to do this process, but those positions are terminal. So the Arch will shed those roles as Renew My Church winds to a close in the next 18 months. Do we still pay our people too much, especially in certain areas? Probably, absolutely. Could we be more humble and more poor? Absolutely. But is the Arch also feeling the reality of what it means to go kicking and screaming into change? I think so. A little bit, at least. And then I think she was good. Rest of your case. Okay. All right. Wait a minute. 822. Okay, last question. Let's do it.
It's not really a question, but it's just a statement I've been listening to. I think the strength of our church, of our faith, which we all have to say we're proud to be, and not denigrate it, and just to be who we are. And I think, from my own family, my own experience, my parents were very quiet people, but we learned the faith, and I can even hear Father, at certain sermons, will use the same statements that my parents used. You live the faith, but I think it comes as hard as it is, and I know my own family, I have some in California, but we got to stay. The parents, the grandparents, relatives, anybody that we can have to just be the strength, because I think the leaders are the children. They're going to see what we've done, or somehow it's going to rub on them, and then we send them out. And I don't mean there's no program that I'm talking about, I'm sure, but my parents were involved, and so I think and my relatives were involved, and I think so that's where I think a big essence of our faith is.
No, thank you. I really love what you said about just being ourselves, because I think that's really important to, when we think about what's coming next with this new reality. There is no, like I said, there's no program that the Arch is going to come to you and say, okay, this is it, trust me, this is the one. We're not trying to make every parish into Willow Creek. We're not trying to make every parish use praise and worship music. We're not trying to make every parish, whatever. The way that Christ is going to work most fruitfully through each of these communities is if each of these communities can be themselves and be themselves to the fullest. So thank you for that comment. Father Kevin, I think I've turned over to you.
Sorry.
And thank you for all those who had questions and concerns, and also let's show a round of warm appreciation for Brian for being here at this point. Before we go to, some would say, the most important part of the evening, as we go for hospitality and a little food, which is a St. Mary tradition, I would like to ask, and without embarrassing anybody, I'd like to introduce our team for the grouping, feedback, and discernment team. And again, it's conversations I had over many months with some people so they could see and pray and recognize that they were being called to be part of this team. So when I call your name, if you could just stand up, and I won't ask them to tell their biography, because that's going to be in our bulletins and on our website very soon. First, I'd just like to invite Kathy Benz to please stand up. So. Right. Shelley Benson. Carolyn Buford. I'm not sure if she was here tonight or not. Carrie Farrell, who's probably in the back. And then James Holzhauer Chuckus, who had just leave to finish up with the youth ministry. We were required to have a staff member on it too. And then we had James, who will be part, because he's their youth minister over all the parishes, so he has a good read on what's happening in Evanston with that, and then also with our other team members. So again, so along with myself, that's 6 people. We will be going through these meetings. You can sit down, Kathy. I didn't mean to embarrass you. And then again, as Brian said, we will have one person from each team who will be on the writing team, who will then present the proposals to the executive committee in December, and then that'll go to the Cardinal and the Presbyteral Council, and then from the letters I've seen, then sometime either in January or February would be where the decisions would be made. So again, keep, as we were praying for, not only for ourselves, for all those who are going through the groupings, in a special way, if you could keep all our team members in for the grouping, feedback, and discernment team in your prayers as we are open. As we just celebrated our 156th anniversary of St. Mary's here this past on the Assumption Sunday on August 15th, let us be like Mary and let us continue to say yes to the Lord as he calls us in many ways. She pondered many things in her heart, and that's what we were going to be called to do this fall into the winter, to ponder many things. And even after the decisions are made, even if things are moving towards a certain thing, it's going to take some time for lots of different things. As an example, one of the first, the pilot wave was up at was the Wilmette, Winnetka, Kenilworth area. We see where St. Joseph and St. Francis joined into one. It took a couple years to get some decisions made. It wasn't an overnight thing like a light switch comes where everything gets put together. It's a process, and there's people, 2 groups that had to come to become more like one and then grow from that. Again, we don't know what our reality will be. We don't know what decision will be made, but we know we can walk together. Remember, and I always remind everybody else in Evanston that we are the mother church of Evanston. We started in 1865, and it was from us. It was a mother who begat her children, St. Nick's, for the Germans and the Luxembourger communities who needed a parish for the language that they understood. St. A's in the 1920s, Joan of Arc, 1960s. And so in some ways, the circles come back around. But again, it's all about what God wants in our area. So it can be very easy to see this as very negative, but in many ways, it's a very positive thing. It allows us to join together and see each other beyond artificial boundaries that we've had committed over the years. To recognize where God, like St. Francis did at St. Damiano, recognizing how are we called to rebuild this church, sometimes with brick and mortar, sometimes with a parking lot. But how are we called to be re-energized as Mary was, pondering many things in her heart, going further, going to a foreign land, coming back when the Lord called her, taking her son, finding him in the temple, standing at the foot of the cross, but not always having all the answers. And we won't have all the answers. But again, if we stay together, if we grow, we recognize where God is asking us to grow as individuals and as a community, it'll be a very positive thing. So again, I would like to, in closing, if Brian, if you don't have anything else to do, I'd like to ask if you've ever picked up one of those Renew My Church cards, I'd like to end with us praying that prayer together. Let us all please stand, if possible. And we pray this together. Lord Jesus, you speak to us today as you spoke to holy men and women who have gone before us. In every age and in our own time, you call to us and say, renew my church. Pour out the gift of your Holy Spirit upon us, and so enable us to hear you clearly. to listen to each other attentively, to imagine our future boldly, to discern your direction wisely, to persevere in your holy will courageously, to stay together in charity, to surrender our own plans readily, to embrace the greater good, to hand on your gifts to future generations. May we remain in the holy company of the Blessed Virgin Mary, the apostles, and all the saints. May their example and presence inspire us with patient confidence in the work of your grace. We ask this of you who live and reign with the Father and the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. Again, thank you for taking the time out on this beautiful day to be here, and let us join each other in fellowship and with good community and with some good food in our gathering space. So thank you again. God bless each and every one of you. Thank you.